Now in our 25th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are this week in Amateur Radio. Your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition, number 1330, with a release and air date of Saturday, August 24, 2024. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
On the air and on the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable, amateur radio news and special features. This is This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1330 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The FCC proposes modernizing the 3.5 GHz band rules for a modified citizens' broadband radio service. The ARRL issues a complete IT security incident report to its members. We will have it for you. The candidates for the upcoming ARRL director and vice director elections have been announced. The Voice of America is shuttering its Marianas Island shortwave transmitter sites. The upcoming AMSAT Symposium has issued its first call for papers. NASA is soliciting student-built projects for future launches into space. Radio New Zealand Pacific on shortwave has activated new transmitters. Scientists are saying that the current solar cycle is one of the best ever. Finland announces a new low-band station on 252 kHz in the Arctic Circle. The stranded astronauts on the space station will be coming home in 2025 on a SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. A new repeater system to enhance emergency communications is under construction in British Columbia, Canada. And, the moon is slowly moving further away, which will result in making the days on Earth longer. We will have all the details, and when you can expect a 25-hour day, in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio, will explain what he means when he says, "In the beginning there was the contact." Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, will present another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back in time to the early issues of QST magazine and talks about how humor played a prominent role in QST, in a segment he entitled, Humor, Poetry, and Rotten Rants. And, we will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on active or upcoming DX expeditions, radio sport, DX in general, upcoming contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside Albany, New York, where the first signs of fall are beginning to appear on the trees, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting from our news bureau this week, from amateur station K2MST, inside the Museum of Science and Technology in Armory Square, downtown Syracuse, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, where the cooler weather is starting to show up here in upstate New York, bringing autumn with it. In the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting in our news bureau from Knoxville, Tennessee, back from the Huntsville Ham Fest. It was good to see everybody. I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where the Purple Loosestrife is making its appearance, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our news bureau here in Western Mass, where the air is filled with the sound of backpacks unzipping and the cries of parents crying trying to remember algebra, I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
And reporting from our radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where decent weather has arrived, corn is being chopped, cows are being fed, and hay is being baled, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And now, with our lead story, here is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
The Federal Communications Commission voted unanimously to begin a proceeding to update the Citizens Broadband Radio Service. Building on years of successful interagency collaboration, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking seeks comment on a wide range of potential rule changes to improve the Citizens Broadband Radio Service for all current and future users of the 3.55 through 3.7 GHz band. Preserving and enhancing the Citizens Broadband Radio Service continues the Commission's commitment to develop innovative, collaborative mechanisms to facilitate greater spectrum use. This NPRM follows other innovative spectrum management approaches taken earlier this year, such as the Commission's adoption of the Supplemental Coverage from Space licensing framework and the approval of automated frequency systems to manage unlicensed use in the 6 GHz band. The 3.5 GHz band uses a three-tiered spectrum sharing model that protects incumbent access users, allows for geographically licensed operations following the FCC's 2020 auction of priority access licenses, and permits opportunistic licensed by rule general authorized access use for a wide variety of uses, including operations within factories, cities, hospitals, research centers, schools, public libraries, and utilities. The NPRM proposes to add definitions to Part 96 related to protection of federal incumbent users and modify other Part 96 rules governing such protections. It also proposes to sunset rules related to the transition of grandfathered wireless broadband services in the 3.65 to 3.7 GHz band. In addition to the specific proposals related to federal protection, the NPRM seeks comment on, among other things, whether to align 3.5 GHz protection methodologies with those in adjacent bands, revisit our environmental sensing capability approval procedures, and facilitate the continued introduction of Citizens Broadband Radio Service in areas outside of the contiguous United States. With adoption of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, the FCC will take comments on the proposals in this item. Comments may be submitted through and read in the FCC's electronic comment filing system. Comments will be due in GN docket number 17-258, 30 days after Federal Register publication of the NPRM, and reply comments will be due 60 days after Federal Register publication.
ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, has announced that the candidates for the 2024 ARRL division elections are now official. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with all the details.
ARRL members will choose between two candidates for director in the Hudson, New England, and Northwestern divisions. The sole candidates in the Central and Roanoke divisions for both director and vice director are unopposed. The vice director incumbents in the Hudson, New England, and Northwestern divisions are also unopposed. And elected without opposition in the Central Division, candidate and current Vice Director Brent Walls, N9BA, will be the next director, having served as Vice Director since 2021. And candidate Josh Long, W9HT, will be the next Vice Director. Both candidates are running unopposed. In the Hudson Division, Vice Director David Galletti, KM20, has held the seat since 2024. In the New England Division, Vice Director Phil Temples, K9HI, who has served the role since 2020. In the Northwestern Division, Vice Director Michael Starbuck, KG7HQ, who has served the role since 2024. And in the Roanoke Division, Director Jim Boehner, N2ZZ, who was elected back to the board in 2022. And Vice Director Bill Moraine, N2COP, was elected to that seat and has held it since 2016. In the contested seats in the Hudson Division, Director Ed Wilson, N2XDD, will face challenger John Covelli, W2GD, for the seat. In the New England Division, Director Fred Kemmerer, AB1OC, will face challenger Tom Frenet, K1KL, who has previously held the positions of Director and Vice President. In the Northwestern Division, Director Mark Tharp, KB7HDX, will run against Dan Marler, K7REX, who is currently a section manager. Balloting for contested seats will take place this fall. Votes will be counted and successful candidates announced in November. Candidates declared elected will assume their roles for terms beginning January 1st, 2025. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
ARRL is governed by its board of directors. Elections are held for 5 of the 15 ARRL divisions each year for terms of 3 years.
Now celebrating our 25th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Earlier this week, the ARRL released the following report to its members. It reads as follows. Sometime in early May 2024, ARRL's systems network was compromised by threat actors, or TAs, using information they had purchased on the dark web. The TAs accessed headquarters' on-site systems and most cloud-based systems. They used a wide variety of payloads affecting everything from desktops and laptops to Windows-based and Linux-based servers. Despite the wide variety of target configurations, the TAs seem to have a payload that would host and execute encryption or deletion of network-based IT assets, as well as launch demands for a ransom payment for every system. This serious incident was an act of organized crime. The highly coordinated and executed attack took place during the early morning hours of May 15th. That morning, as staff arrived, it was immediately apparent that the ARRL had become the victim of an intensive and sophisticated ransomware attack. The FBI categorized the attack as unique, as they had not seen this level of sophistication among the many other attacks they have experienced. Within 3 hours, a crisis management team had been constructed of ARRL management, an outside vendor with extensive resources and experience in the ransomware recovery space, attorneys experienced with managing the legal aspects of the attack, including interfacing with the authorities and our insurance carrier. The authorities were contacted immediately, as was ARRL president. The ransom demands by the TAs in exchange for access to their decryption tools were exorbitant. It was clear they didn't know and didn't care that they had attacked a small 501c3 organization with limited resources. Their ransom demands were dramatically weakened by the fact that they did not have access to any compromising data. It was also clear that they believed ARRL had extensive insurance coverage that would cover a multi-million-dollar ransom payment. After days of tense negotiation and brinkmanship, ARRL agreed to pay $1 million in ransom. That payment, along with the cost of restoration, has been largely covered by our insurance policy. From the start of the incident, the ARRL board met weekly using a continuing special board meeting for full progress reports and to offer assistance. In the first few meetings, there were significant details to cover, and the board was thoughtfully engaged, asked important questions, and was fully supportive of the team at headquarters to keep the restoration efforts moving. Member updates were posted to a single page on the website and were posted across the internet in many forums and groups. ARRL worked closely with professionals deeply experienced in ransomware matters on every post. It is important to understand that the TAs had ARRL under a magnifying glass while we were negotiating. Based on the expert advice we were being given, we could not publicly communicate anything informative, useful, or potentially antagonistic to the TAs during this time frame. Today, most systems have been restored or are waiting for interfaces to come back online to interconnect them. While we have been in restoration mode, we have also been working to simplify the infrastructure to the extent possible. We anticipate that it may take another month or two to complete restoration under the new infrastructure guidelines and new standards. Most ARRL member benefits remained operational during the attack. One that wasn't was Logbook of the World, which was one of our most popular benefits. LOTW data was not impacted by the attack, and once the environment was ready to again permit access to the public to ARRL network-based servers, we returned LOTW to service. The fact that Logbook of the World took less than 4 days to get through a backlog that at times exceeded over 60,000 logs was outstanding. The board at the ARRL second board meeting in July voted to approve a new committee, the Information Technology Advisory Committee. This will be comprised of ARRL staff, board members with demonstrated experience in IT, and additional members from the IT industry who are currently employed as subject matter experts in a few areas. They will help analyze and advise on future steps to take with the ARRL IT within the financial means available to the organization. We thank you for your patience as we navigated our way through this. The emails of moral support and offers of IT expertise were well received by the team. Although we are not entirely out of the woods yet and are still working to restore minor servers that serve internal needs, such as various email services like bulk mail and some internal reflectors, we are happy with the progress that has been made and for the incredible dedication of the staff and consultants who continue to work together to bring this incident to a successful conclusion.
During its July meeting, the ARRL Board of Directors approved the formation of the ARRL Information Technology Advisory Committee, or ITAC. The committee is charged with overseeing the current ARRL information technology infrastructure as well as security of those systems. The board suggested the ARRL Investment Management Committee as a model for ITAC, referencing the desire to engage experts from the field to help oversee IT-related tasks. In the spirit of moving quickly, the ITAC committee is expected to have its initial meeting within 30 days of the July meeting and have a roadmap in place by January.
Citing a shrinking listener audience, high costs of operation, and lingering damages inflicted by a Category 5 super typhoon in October of 2018, the Voice of America has decided to discontinue transmissions from its shortwave station in the northern Mariana Islands. The move was reported by local media in the U.S. Pacific Territory based on a letter from the United States Agency for Global Media. I suspect your organization has heard over the past weeks about a big change taking place at the U.S. Agency for Global Media's Robert E. Camosa Transmitting Station, or REKTS. The change is a discontinuation of all shortwave radio transmissions at our Saipan and Tinian sites, the first step in closing the station, according to the letter. REKTS consists of a transmitter and antenna system at Anjin Point on the southwestern part of Saipan, and a second transmitter and antenna system on the western side of Tinian. The site was used for multiple language programming from Radio Free Asia and Voice of America into the East Asia region. William Martin, director of the U.S. Transmitting Stations and Operations Division, stated that by now many of you have heard that the Voice of America shortwave station on Saipan and Tinian, which operates under the U.S. Agency for Global Media, are closing. After decades of operation, these facilities are being phased out as shortwave audiences migrate to other media. Although these closures mark the end of an era, they are also bittersweet, as in closing these stations, we also say farewell to the people and communities that supported our mission for so many years. On behalf of the agency, I would like to thank our staff and the many community members who contributed meaningfully to the station's operation these many years. Martin served as station manager from 2013 to 2019. In recent years, U.S. Agency for Global Medias has sought to redirect resources from shortwave broadcasting to other channels based on where it can best reach its desired audience. In the 2025 budget for justification document, the agency noted a full review of shortwave and medium wave broadcasting requirements, leading to some reductions in regions where agency research shows that shortwave audiences have become vanishingly small. An additional challenge for the facility was lingering damage from Category 5 super typhoon U2, which destroyed the station's infrastructure in October of 2018. According to a government report, the storm shredded 16 shortwave curtain antennas at the site and downed one of its support towers. Using salvaged parts, 5 of the antennas were fully restored by the end of fiscal year 2020, and 3 more were back in operation by the end of 2023, with parts for 3 additional antennas on site. The site on Saipan first went on the air in 1982 as Super Rock KYOI, a commercial station targeting Japan with rock and pop music. It was acquired in 1986 by Herald Broadcasting Service. Radio Free Asia began leasing the transmitters in September of 1996 and purchased the facility in 1999. Construction of the Tinian site began in 1993 when the U.S. Department of Defense transferred 834 acres of land on the island to the U.S. Information Agency. In recent years, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty and other U.S. government broadcast services have increasingly relied on non-shortwave platforms to get their messages across to international listeners.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The Federal Communications Commission accepted for public comment a petition for rulemaking filed by NextNav Incorporated, a licensee in the 900 megahertz location and monitoring service, or LMS, to completely reconfigure the 902 through 928 megahertz band and replace the LMS with high-powered 5G cellular and related location services. The FCC notice requested comment on the effects that NextNav's proposals would have on amateur radio operations in the band. The FCC notice requested comment on the effects that NextNav's proposals would have on amateur radio operations in the band, the ARRL said. The National Association for Amateur Radio is preparing comments urging protection of existing and future amateur uses in this band and urges all amateurs to file their own comments describing their activities in this band and the expected effect of the proposed changes. NextNav currently holds licenses in the 900 megahertz band that authorizes it to provide services limited to determining the location and status of mobile radio units. NextNav ties its request to provide high-power broadband, cellular, and location services to the vulnerabilities of the current satellite-based GPS system and urges that implementation of its proposal would complement GPS by providing an alternative nationwide terrestrial location system in addition to cellular and broadband services. Under its proposal, NextNav would be designated the sole nationwide licensee for this spectrum in exchange for its more limited licenses. The new nationwide license would authorize NextNav to provide much higher-powered traditional broadband and 5G cellular services, as well as the related location service occupying 15 of the total 26 megahertz available in the band. The reconfiguration proposed by NextNav would create a 5 MHz wide uplink subband at 902 to 907 MHz, paired with a 10 MHz downlink subband at 918 to 928 MHz. The 5 MHz uplink subband would be limited to use by mobiles with a maximum of 3 watts ERP. On the 10 MHz downlink subband, up to 2,000 watts ERP would be permitted in rural areas and 1,000 watts ERP in urban and suburban areas, radiating from tower structures that could reach 1,000 feet or more feet above average terrain. These configurations reflect the FCC's rules for standard cellular configurations that have been adopted to govern a number of other bands used for similar 5G and like services. Although uses by the amateur radio service in the band are secondary to LMS, NextNav is proposing substantial technical and use changes that would completely alter the foundation upon which the current rules and spectrum sharing arrangements rely, and undercut shared use of the band by amateurs as well as a variety of other users. In addition, NextNav proposes deletion of a specific interference provision in the Commission's rules that was adopted to encourage and protect continued sharing with amateurs and other secondary users. NextNav, in this petition, argues, without evidence, that the changes that it proposes to the 902 to 928 MHz band will not impede amateur radio operations. In an 8-page description of NextNav's proposal released by the FCC's Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, the FCC staff asked a series of questions that would clarify the proposal and help the Commission ascertain the likely effects of the proposed changes on existing users if the requested changes were adopted. Comment was specifically requested on the extent of amateur operations in the band, the potential impact of the proposed changes, any other spectrum options that may exist, and the cost for relocations if other options exist. ARRL is preparing comments urging protection for existing and future amateur uses in this band. ARRL urges all amateurs to study the proposal and file their own comments describing their activities in this band and the expected effect of the proposed changes. The filing deadline is September 5th, 2024. Replies to comments are due by September 20th, 2024. You can find details on how to file comments with the Commission on the League's website.
Record high solar cycle 25 solar maximum sunspot numbers have improved HF propagation since mid-July and possibly bringing worldwide 6-meter F2 propagation this fall. Here with the details is John Ross, KD8IDJ, reporting from League headquarters.
According to the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center, solar cycle 25 likely reached its highest sunspot number yet, as of 299 on August 8th. The World Data Center Sunspot Index and Long-Term Solar Observations publishes near real-time estimated international sunspot numbers, EISN, and they base those on global networks of reporting stations. EISN reports during solar cycle 25 were consistently well below 200 until suddenly rising to 218 on July 14th and reaching 289 on July 18th, but then declining to 178 on July 22nd. Since February 2002, worldwide 6-meter propagation has been mostly limited to sporadic occurrences of transequatorial propagation, known as TEP, near the equinox months, and the occasional sporadic E propagation reaching many thousands of miles during June and July. Worldwide 6-meter F2 propagation may occur again, perhaps very frequently, starting in late October of 2024, if daily EISN reports consistently remain well above 200. For more detailed information and access to all of the links, visit arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
While occasional brief daily EISN increases are not unusual during solar maximum, after only 5 days, the daily EISN suddenly rose to 212 on July 27th, reaching a solar cycle 25 record high 297 on August 8th, and remaining mostly well above 200 through this writing on August 11th. Daily EISN reports are likely to remain well above 200 during most days through late September and possibly much longer.
The nomination period for the 2024 AMSAT Board of Directors election ended on June 15th. The following candidates have been duly nominated: Mark Hammond, N8MH, Frank Karnaskis, N1UW, Bruce Page, KK5DO, Paul Stoitzer, N8HM, and Douglas Tabor, N6UA. All 3 seats on the Board of Directors are up for election this year. The 3 candidates receiving the largest number of votes shall be declared elected to the seats. The 2 candidates receiving the next largest number of votes shall be declared first alternate and second alternate, respectively. The voting process is now underway. AMSAT members can find candidate statements and electronic voting information on AMSAT's Wild Apricot membership portal. The voting period will conclude on September 15th, and results will be announced no later than September 30th.
This is the first call for papers for the 42nd Annual AMSAT's Space Symposium, to be held on the weekend of October 25th through the 27th, 2024, at the Doubletree by Hilton, Tampa Rocky Point waterfront in Tampa, Florida. Proposals for symposium papers and presentations are invited on any topic of interest to the amateur satellite community. We request a tentative title of your presentation as soon as possible, with a final copy submitted by October 18th for inclusion in the symposium proceedings. Abstracts and papers should be sent to Dan Schultz, N8FGV, at n8fgv@usa.net.
Radio listeners tuning to 252 kilohertz may soon be enjoying some long-range DXing, as Arctic 252, the new broadcast station on that frequency, begins testing things out in September. The Finnish base station is hoping to serve listeners throughout the Arctic region. It is possible, too, that anyone with a long-wave radio receiver might be able to hear some of its signals in the northernmost parts of North America. According to Hackaday, the website reporting this story, the same frequency is used by an Algerian station in North Africa, and it was formerly used by an Irish station, as well as Finland's own YLE longwave broadcaster, although both have long since gone off the air. The broadcaster says on its website, arcticradio.net, that it hopes for a clear channel allocation by the International Telecommunications Union.
Serving the amateur radio community for a quarter century, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, heard around the world on the amateur bands and streaming on the Internet. This Week in Amateur Radio is presenting another chapter of A Century of Amateur Radio, Hams, Organizations, Events, Inventions, from the mind of Chris Cordella, W2PA, and his editing team. Each episode will bring a different aspect of early amateur radio history. Coming up here on This Week in Amateur Radio.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. I received an email from Bill, KB8DF. He wrote, "Last week you mentioned a program for improving your CW speed called Morse Runner. Can you tell me about the program?" Well, sure, Bill, I'd be happy to. Morse Runner was created by VE3NEA Alex. Its purpose is to simulate a CW contest. The program has several options that make it a very valuable tool. You are not only challenged to copy call signs at various speeds, elements such as QRM, QRN, QSB, and flutter, which is the sound of a signal passing over the poles, and even lids, which are poor or illegal operators, are added as well. Once you start the application, leave the settings defaulted and just click the quote run button and you will hear signals from your speakers. And I'm telling you, it is like having a receiver sitting right there. Call CQ by pressing F1. Your CQ will be sent and then the fun begins. Listens for stations calling you and enter the one that you copy into the call field. Your exchange will be sent, which will include the station you copied, the signal report, and your serial number, automatically updated after sending. Listen for the station call you back and enter the serial number that they sent you into the NR field. Hitting enter will log the QSO. If there was an error, you will see it noted in the display field. Otherwise, your score will increment. There may be another station calling you at the same time. At that point, just repeat the above process. If no one is immediately calling you, clicking F3 will send a thank you, followed by your call. Be prepared for other stations to call. I have seen instances in my use where you have to call CQ several times before anyone comes back to you, and then all of a sudden you get a bunch of them. So for my station at least, it's very realistic. And I'll tell you from my own experience, this can become addictive, but it will sharpen your skills. So just search for Morse Runner, all one word, and you will find either software you can get, or if you search Morse Runner in YouTube, you'll be able to watch it in action. It really is a terrific program. Let me know how you do. Well, I hope that answers your question, Bill, and thanks for the email. Often people will ask me if there is a written copy of the information that I present. There are many call signs, dates, and URLs being discussed. You could never remember them until such time as you could write them down. I use most of the same data that you hear here in the DX Corner for the weekly DX column in the Ohio Section Journal. If you just Google ARRL Ohio Section, you will find the Ohio Section website and you can subscribe to the weekly journal and get most of the information that I present. The actual website is arrl-ohio.org. It's a free journal and you don't need to be an ARRL member to receive it. You won't get the well-rounded information that you get from This Week in Amateur Radio podcast, but you will get my DX information. So here's what's happening in the world of DX. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. The N5J team surpassed 100,000 contacts from Jarvis Island. They are now QRT. To thank the ops who have worked them on CW, sideband, FT8, and 5 bands, a certificate is available. The team headed back to begin teardown, and the first thing that they took down was the link to the island, so they will be completely QRT at once. Thank you for all the QSOs. It was a blast. A full recap after we get the island clean and get some sleep will be passed along. And that was from Don and George and the entire N5J team. And I'll tell you, they did an absolutely terrific job, so my hat's off to them. The update we get here is from WA4DAN Murray. Quote, everything still looks good for the August 26th to September 5th CY9C DXpedition to St. Paul Island. The first load of gear was successfully delivered to Dingwall, Nova Scotia on August 6th. Ironically, the DXpedition gear is safely stored at the St. Paul Lighthouse Museum in Dingwall. Museum staff members helped with the unloading of the gear. Since all of the gear will be transported to the Northeast Island at St. Paul by helicopter, all gear must be weighed first. This process was completed earlier, and the total weight of the CY9C gear is 7,500 pounds. The Breton Air Heavy Lift helicopter will be slinging the fuel, water, tents, tables, chairs, coax, and all of the other gear needed to build the camp. Air Dolan will be transporting the team members along with their personal gear. The first team members will arrive in Dingwall on August 22nd. The estimated cost of this DXpedition has now approached $100,000, by far the most expensive CY9 DXpedition ever. By contrast, boat transportation costs for the 1995 CY9 DXpedition with team leader WA4DAN was only $300, so significantly different. Please note that the main island at St. Paul is no longer available for DXpeditions. The Northeast Island is almost impossible to land on by boat, especially with tons of gear. As always, the schedule may shift a little depending on weather and flying conditions. Donations are very much welcome and appreciated via the CY9C website, and I would encourage you to do that. $20 will make a huge difference. So here's an update from a friend and club member here in the Ohio area. Dean, W2FQ, has joined the 3 Delta 2 Zulu Rotuma on-island team. A retired U.S. Special Forces Airborne Ranger, Dean took away from his 20 years of service the importance of teamwork, accomplishing the mission, never quitting, and always valuing input from your men. He says, "This is my first DXpedition, and I couldn't be more excited to be part of the 3 Delta 2 Zulu team." Dean replaces Hal, W88C, who stepped down for personal reasons. "We would like to thank Hal for his contributions," the team wrote. Funding efforts continue for the November 15th to December 4th DXpedition, and you can visit the 3 Delta 2 Zulu website for more information, and it's a really neat website. Stan, LZ1GC, and Ted, LZ5QZ, will operate from the Kingdom of Tonga as A35GC, November 25th to December 6th. They plan to be on the air 24/7 with 3 transmitters on 160 meters through 6 meters, CW, sideband, RIDI, and FT8, FT4, with a special focus on 160, 80, and 60. You can QSL via OQRS, LOTW, or direct to LZ1GC on QRZ.com. A group of hams are planning a trip to C5, the Gambia, November 25th to the 29th. They will operate from the mainland as C5 Tango and possibly from the Bijou Islands as C5I. Both call signs are pending. The team will be on various bands and modes, including 60 and 6 meters. You can QSL the C5I and the C5T, both via EA5GL. The same team plans to be QRV from a, quote, never-before-activated IOTA in 2025, but they're not telling us where yet. Details on both operations will follow. A group of DX operators from Uruguay will operate holiday style as C91BV October 17th to the 24th from Mozambique. They will have 2 100-watt stations and 40 through 6 meter CW and sideband capabilities. So I'm excited about that one. VK1AO Allen will be QRV again from Timor-Leste as 4 Whiskey stroke VK1AO August 19th to September 19th, including activity from POTA sites and from Mount Romuald, the country's highest peak. Allen operates mainly 40 through 12 FT8. He should be QRV by now, but I've not heard him yet. So keep an eye out for that group or that individual from Timor-Leste. After announcing our 2024 expedition to Guinea 3X, we learned that others had planned to go there just before us without having announced it. So we canceled this destination and worked hard to start a new project from scratch. F6KOP can now inform the DX community that its next expedition will take place by the end of 2024 to Sierra Leone 9 Lima. This DXCC entity has already been activated by F6KOP in 2019, but is, however, in 80th position on the most wanted list. 14 operators are planned, and human modes, CW and sideband, will have an important place in the traffic. We will pass along more information as we have it. DF2SO Harold starts his next XT2AW operation from Burkina Faso starting September 8th for 2 weeks. He'll be on 80 through 6 meters looking for the best propagation and casual operation and looking for contacts on the QO100 satellite. He'll be QSLing via M0OXO OQRS, but not through the Bureau. He will upload his logbook of the world when he returns home. The VK9CVD expedition team to Cocos Keeling, November 1 through the 15th, has added operator OM5RW Miro. Miro will focus on 160 meters. The group will also make an effort on 6 meters, so there's another one to make a note of. 4 Alpha 2 MAX is again on the air from Mexico all this month to remember St. Maximilian Maria Kolbe. This one is on the HF bands, sideband, CW, and digital. Father Kolbe, who had the call sign SP3RN, was born in 1894 and killed in 1941 at Auschwitz. He is considered the patron saint of ham radio. You can QSL that via EA5GL, Club Log, EQSL, or QRZ logbook. V51WH and V55Y is making a return trip to Namibia. V55Y is his contest operating event call sign. Gunter expects to arrive September 19th and leaves for home on November 12th. For gear, he will be equipped with an IC 7300 and an ACOM 1010 with the legal power limit being 400 watts. He will have a spider beam vertical for 60, 40, and 30, a dipole for 160 and 80. So overall, he plans to do 160 through 10, maybe a bit of 6 meters. He'll do single sideband FT8 and some CW. Gunter hopes to get into the CQ Worldwide DX contest during that time period, Ridian phone. You can QSL the V55Y to DK2WH or via the Bureau. There's a large group that will be activating Dal Char Island, Bangladesh, in December 13th through the 19th. They planned 4 stations to cover 160 through 10, single sideband, RIDI, and FT8 Fox Hounds. Logbook of the World and Club Log uploads will be some days after the operation is over. If you are someone who likes podcasts and or YouTube episodes, the DX Mentor has part 2 of the Enhancing Your DX Experience with well-known DXers Ralph, K9ZO, and Joe, W8GEX. Check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts by searching on the DX Mentor. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the Ohio QSO contest this weekend and in the pile-ups.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
Welcome to this, the 7th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, hams, organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. I want to thank Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his great website in the preparation of these programs. So, enjoy this, the next of many chapters of ham radio history. Humor, poetry, and rotten rants. Humor played a prominent role in QST from its first issue, born of the evident joy hams derived in pursuing their passion for radio. The first curious attempt in the first issue, 2 pages from the back cover, was not an article at all, but a reprinted letter. It had been sent by a Japanese radio student, identified only as Cathis Cathan, of Heinakis, who attempted to ask a technical question in painstaking but painfully broken English, the main source of humor and confusion. Despite this, the student seemed to be posing a fairly deep question. In a condenser, the dielectric is the heart of the device and is the material in which charge is stored, he wrote, and seemed to cite his interpretation of English technical papers to back this up. But he then asked, how could this be true for air dielectric condensers, since he could blow the air away and still have charge left? It was quite a reasonable question coming from a beginning student trying to get a foundational understanding of a device that was fundamental to radio. Exactly where charge is stored was his main source of confusion. He closed his letter with, quote, "Explanation me, Honorable Radio Secretary, for which accept my assurances most distinguished consideration," unquote, referring to Tosca. The letter and its appearance in QST are difficult to figure out, especially the name Cathis Cathan, which is distinctly not Japanese sounding, and the location, which does not seem to exist today, except that young Tosca probably found the letter hilarious. The Secretary of the League offered a $5 reward to readers for the best answer judged by its, quote, funny side or technical value, unquote, in that order. The responses appeared in February QST, and the promised award was announced. Some respondents attempted to be humorous. One seriously tried to answer the question, but interpreted the original letter differently from how I did. The Old Man, the pseudonymous author of a long-running humor series, made its first appearance in the second issue of QST, writing about running tests between amateur stations, a non-humor piece. He described a scenario in which two hams set up a scheduled contact, trying to work each other over some long distance, despite the party-line nature of radio at that point, only to have their attempt foiled by a combination of household distractions and boys making long transmissions using spark coils. There was a need, he asserted, for scheduled, widely agreed-to times for relay testing when other, unimportant amateur work would keep quiet. He suggested a 30-minute window each night between, say, 8:45 and 9:15. Little boys with spark coils and a few dry cells were the usual source of casual interference, he wrote. Times between 7:30 and 10 p.m. were particularly problematic. Therefore, another way to avoid interference would be to wait until later in the evening when the little boys had been tucked away for the night. Later he allowed that, of course, the boys should be encouraged to practice radio signaling, but that surely it should not be so difficult to keep quiet for a few minutes each night. The little boy with a squeak box thus became a frequent target of complaints about QRM interference, but they were not all little boys, and an alternative view began to assert itself. QST began receiving mail complaining about the frequent disparagement of the little boys with squeak boxes. Not only were these individuals frequently mature adults, but spark coils were routinely used for long-distance work and to participate in links in the relays. The devices were also more efficient, some argued, as measured in distance per watt, than the transformer stations. This sounds like the QRP-QRO argument today. Nearly a year after the old man's piece was published, the editor, likely also Maxim, wrote in response, "For our share of this thoughtless aspersion of the spark coil, we apologize in public and in print. Now, about the little boy part, QST may have gotten the age wrong, but the abusers, whatever their age, did exist and were causing untold misery to other operators. Nevertheless," he wrote, "to the little boy, who is well behaved after 9 p.m., and the spark coil, who is always well behaved if the vibrator is kept clean, we extend the glad hand of fellowship. All of us were once little boys ourselves. Many of us are little boys yet, and practically all of us had our whack at the spark coil before we got there in radio. Radio was not just for the male of the species either. Women and girls interested in wireless were welcomed in a fashion, but treated as rare curiosities. In the first reference to one in QST, R.M. McLean of Huntsville, Alabama, wrote a letter reporting that while traveling in the hills of northern Alabama, he came across a young lady, about age 17 he estimated, working on an aerial. She was definitely a radio enthusiast. "I am crazy about it," she said, and was constantly repairing this particular aerial every time the wind would blow it down. McLean also noticed various farm animals and a spinning wheel apparently still in use, and commented how it was certainly an unusual girl, able to operate anything from an old spinning wheel to a modern wireless telegraph. The humor tradition resumed in May with the inaugural installment of the long-running series of rants by the old man, Tom, that would come to be known as the Rotten Series, since their titles all included that word. In time, people generally accepted the fact that the humorous Vetch was HPM himself, but there was no conclusive proof or admission published until after his death years later. This makes the back and forth between Tom and the QST editorial page about the little boys with squeak boxes all the more amusing. Both were unsigned, and both had probably been written by Maxim. In Rotten Sending, aside from criticizing disproportioned Morse code elements, Tom complained about the increasingly popular practice of using abbreviations and shortened spellings, HV for have, NITE for night, etc., most of which have been in common use for a long time today. Included in this material are quotes from the following. The Secretary of the American Radio Relay League offers a reward, QST December 1915, page 23. Running tests between amateur stations, QST, January 1916, page 8. The Little Boy with the Spark Coil, editorial, QST, March 1917, page 27. R.M. McLean, Radio Communications of the Amateurs, QST, March 1916. The Old Man, Rotten Sending, QST, May 1916, page 98. With gratitude to W2PA Chris Cadella for allowing us the use of his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
The Radio Amateurs of Canada is reporting that there have been several recent attempts from RAC members of phishing attempts by someone purporting to be from Radio Amateurs of Canada, or who is forwarding a message on their behalf. Phishing attacks come from scammers disguised as trustworthy sources and can facilitate access to all types of sensitive data. As technologies evolve, so do cyber attacks. Phishing attempts use publicly available information to fake legitimacy. In some cases, they use the names and contact information of RAC officials to gain your trust. For example, a recent phishing attempt used the fake heading Minutes and Announcements August 2, 2024, and states, "You have received a secure message from Phil A. McBride from Radio Amateurs of Canada." It then instructs recipients to save and open an attachment and then sign in using their own email address. In these cases, please do not follow the instructions.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
It is time for AMSAT's satellite shorts from all over, and this week we begin with Orbital Space announcing its lunar program to send a student-built experiment to the moon, marking the Arab world's first privately funded lunar mission. The experiment by students from the AGH University of Science and Technology in Poland focuses on analyzing interactions between lunar regolith and various materials that could be used in making cables and connectors for future lunar missions. Astrobotic will carry the payload on its third lunar mission aboard a Griffin-class lunar lander, targeting launch no earlier than the fourth quarter of 2026. Next up comes word that a Chinese Long March 6A rocket launched 18 Qingfang broadband internet satellites into polar orbit last week. Shanghai Spacecom Satellite Technology's new constellation, translated as Thousand Sails, may grow to as many as 14,000 satellites. It joins potentially two other under-development broadband Chinese mega-constellations, each proposing over 10,000 satellites, in competition with OneWeb, Kuiper, and Starlink. Unfortunately, the LM-6A's upper stage appears to have malfunctioned and has created a mess in space as it scattered over 700 pieces of space debris in a fairly high 800-kilometer orbit. The debris at this altitude will likely take about a century for orbital decay. And finally this week, a couple of very short stories. First, the SpaceX Transporter 11 rideshare mission launched 116 payloads from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California on August 16th. 4 of these payloads carry transmitters on amateur bands. Nightjar and Toro carry amateur UHF transmitters, but are not IARU coordinated. Cube carries an amateur UHF transmitter, but its IARU coordination was declined. Orsato Point 5 is the sole IARU coordinated amateur mission on this launch, with downlinks of 436.500 MHz and 2422.0 MHz. And we finish up with 3 AMSAT Gridmaster Awards presented over the past week. Number 67 was awarded to NDAF N6UTC, number 68 was awarded to Raymond KN2K, and number 69 was awarded to Stephen KC1MMC. Congratulations to both. Additionally, 2 reverse VUCC awards were issued. Number 15 was awarded to Sean KX9X with 103 grids, and number 16 was issued to Randy ND0C with 109 grids. Congratulations to all the new award recipients.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Getting started in our hobby can be a challenge. Even if you've got a shiny new license and you've been taught what the legal requirements are, you might even have your first radio. But after that, it might feel like you're all on your own in this bright and shiny new world. It doesn't have to be that way. First thing to know is that you are exactly where all other amateurs have been before you. In other words, don't stress too much about what you don't know or what mistakes you might make. I recently read a comment from a new amateur who was so scared of making a mistake that they hadn't made their first contact. You should know that there is a massive difference between making an accidental mistake and knowingly interfering with another service. Here's some mistakes I've made. My license permits a maximum power level of 10 watts. I dutifully set up my radio to do just that. Made my first contact on HF using 10 watts, only to learn later that power levels are set separately for HF, 6 meters, VHF, and UHF on my specific radio. So the second time I keyed up my microphone, I was using 50 watts. Not only that, I didn't quite understand how to set up my radio for repeater use. So I keyed up on the output frequency and happily talked to the other station, blissfully unaware that I wasn't actually using the repeater. It wasn't until several years later that I learned that the minimum power level was 5 watts on all bands, except UHF, where it is 2 watts. And as icing on the cake, one day I managed a 2-meter contact across about 70 kilometers from my car. It wasn't until later in the night that I discovered that all the settings on my radio had reset, and it was again using 50 watts. Another time I was in the club Radio Shack and having some fun with the club station. I tuned to a 2-meter frequency and called CQ. Didn't hear anything. Then I discovered that I'd missed a decimal point and was actually transmitting on the 20-meter band, where I'm not permitted with my license. Each of those things are outside the restrictions of my license, but made by mistake, not on purpose. Instead of stressing about it, I went, oops, and carried on with a new lesson learned. I will point out that I'm certain that there are more mistakes. Feel free to let me know. Those concerns aside, finding people to talk to is another barrier to entry. We have all these bands and there's nobody about. It reminds me of a funny story I've shared before, told by Wally, Victor Kilo 6 Yankee Sierra Now Silent Key. In his early amateur radio days, he operated from Cockatoo Island, an island off the north coast of Western Australia near Yampi Sound, which is where his call sign came from. With a new radio and transverter for 6 meters, Wally had been calling CQ for weeks, but nobody would talk to him. Occasionally he'd hear a faint voice in the background. Meanwhile, it transpired that amateurs across Japan were getting upset that he wasn't responding to their 20 and 40/9 signal reports. His transmission was getting out just fine. His receiver wasn't working nearly as well. Turns out that during manufacturing, a pin on the back of his transverter hadn't been soldered correctly. Oops. Once he fixed that, he worked 150 Japanese stations on the first day, and a lifelong love of the 6-meter band was born. One hard-learned lesson is that the bands are constantly changing. If you cannot hear anything on one band, try another. If the band is quiet, it's likely because the conditions for that band are bad. But generally this is only true on HF. On VHF and UHF, the opposite is often true. Some bands, like 10 meters and 6 meters, behave more like VHF, but not always. 20 meters can go from brilliant to abysmal and back in seconds, sometimes during the contact. Each band has its own idiosyncrasies that you'll need to explore before you can hope to improve your chances of success, and even years of playing will often get you surprises. I recall trying, for giggles only, to call CQ on a pretty quiet band, only to score an unexpected contact with a Central European station on the other side of the globe. A good rule of thumb is to go where the action is. If you can hear others, they're much more likely to hear you. While this is not universally true, it's a good starting point. Of course, you don't need to physically have a radio to experience any of this. There are many websites that provide you with access to radio tuners. If you search for Web SDR or Kiwi SDR, you'll come across hundreds of online receivers that you can tune and operate on the frequencies they support, using just your web browser. Some have the ability to decode digital modes within the web page, so you won't even have to install any extra software to play. You might think that using such a receiver is not really amateur radio, but I'd like to point out that a transceiver is both a transmitter and a receiver. You can get the receiver right there in your web browser. The transmitter is a little more complex, but technically also possible. Many amateur clubs have a remote accessible station which will allow you to get started. That kills 2 birds with 1 stone. You get to interact with the people in the club, and you get to play on air without needing to figure out just which radio to get, and what antenna to connect it to, and where to put either. Other places to find new friends are, of course, social media, the so-called Fediverse, a collection of social networking services that can communicate with each other, has several communities. You can get started at mastodon.radio and lemmy.radio. There's plenty of other on-air activities like nets, discussion groups where you can get to know other amateurs. I run a weekly net for new and returning amateurs called F-Troop on Saturday morning, midnight UTC for an hour, where you can say hello and ask questions. We pass the microphone around a circle so everyone gets a go. You'll find more information at ftroop.groups.io. Getting started does not have to be a daunting experience. Get on air, make noise, and before you know it, you'll have forgotten just how much you worried about the things that really didn't cause any issues in the big picture. If you're still stuck, drop me an email, cq@vk6flab.com, and I'll attempt to point you in the right direction. What are you waiting for? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Celebrating 25 years of providing the amateur radio community with the latest ham radio news and information, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. The 42nd Annual AMSAT Space Symposium is not far off. This year it will be held October 25th and 26th at the DoubleTree by Hilton, Tampa Rocky Point Waterfront in Tampa, Florida. The Board of Directors will meet October 24th and the morning of the 25th. The evening of the 25th, we have a social and auction. There are all kinds of AMSAT memorabilia and satellite-related things to bid on. There will be a banquet dinner the evening of the 26th with a guest speaker. The morning of the 27th will be an AMSAT Ambassador Breakfast. If you have never attended a symposium and you are interested in satellites, you should consider attending. All the presentations are satellite-related. Most of those attending are satellite operators. This is a great way, like Hamfests, to put a face to that voice you hear during your contacts. Registration for the symposium and hotel is available at amsat.org, and click on the link on the main page. We hope to see you there. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time once again for the weekly propagation forecast report, brought to us each week by our solar prognosticator Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington. 10 new sunspot groups appeared over this reporting week, August 15th through the 21st, but both solar flux and sunspot numbers were lower, due to the extraordinary numbers of the previous week. Average daily sunspot numbers declined from 255 to 180.3, while average daily solar flux went from 284.9 to 232.7. Geomagnetic numbers were quieter. The average daily planetary A index declined from 28.6 to 11.9, and the average daily middle latitude numbers dropped 7.8 to 12. On August 17th, the planetary A index was 31, caused by a coronal mass ejection around 1400 UTC. A strong G3 geomagnetic storm was the result. One new sunspot group appeared on August 15th, 2 more emerged each day from August 16th to the 19th, and 1 more appeared on August 21st. The predicted solar flux for the near term will be 245, 250, 240, 230, and 235 on August 24th through the 28th. 205 on August 29th and 30th. 210 and 215 on August 31st to September 1st. 220 on September 2nd and 3rd. And 225 on September 4th through the 6th. Looking at the planetary A index for the near term shows a value of 5 on August 24th and holding steady all the way through September 17th.
In Radio Sport this week, more great contest on August 23rd to the 25th. It's the SCRY RIDI Ops WW RIDI contest. That's digital. August 24th and 25th, the ARRL EME contest, CW phone and digital. August 24th through the 26th as well, the Hawaii QSO Party, CW phone and digital. August 24th through the 25th, the Alara contest, CW and phone. August 24th and 25th, the YODX HF contest, CW and phone there. August 24th and 25th, it's the U.S. Islands QSO Party, CW phone and digital. Also on the 24th and 25th of August, the Worldwide DigiDX contest, that's digital. August 24th and 25th, the Kansas QSO Party, CW phone and digital. And August 24th and 25th, it's the Ohio QSO Party, CW and phone. And remember, you can visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on August 22nd through the 25th. It's the Northeast Ham Exposition, sponsoring the ARRL New England Division Convention. That's in Marlborough, Massachusetts. August 30th through September 1st, the Shelby Ham Fest, sponsoring the ARRL North Carolina State Convention. That's in Shelby, North Carolina. August 31st, the Summer Symposium, sponsoring the ARRL Santa Barbara Section Convention. That's in Camarillo, California. And on September 8th, the ARRL Southern New Jersey Section Convention. That's in Malacca Hills, New Jersey. The 2024 Slidell, Louisiana EOC Hamfest will be held beginning Friday, September 13th from 2 until 5 p.m. and on Saturday, September 14th from 8 until 2:30 p.m. That event is sponsored by the Ozone Amateur Radio Club. The EOC Hamfest will feature dealer and vendor flea markets, seminars and special presentations, and VE testing sessions. Talk-in frequency is 147.270 MHz with a PL of 114.8 MHz, and admission is just $5. For more information, contact David Hartley, K504, chairman at DE Hartley at untitledcharter.net. The 17th Annual Ohio State Parks on the Air OS POTA contest will be held September 7th, 2024 from 1400 to 2200 UTC. That's 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Contact can be made on 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters using single sideband. Currently, there are 75 Ohio State parks that will be open for the 2024 event. The OS POTA contest has three main goals: to promote public awareness of amateur radio and Ohio's state parks system, to contribute to the recognition that Ohio has a diverse and active ecology, and to promote camaraderie within the ranks of Ohio's amateur radio operators. More available at the OSPOTA website.
Radio amateurs in India are facing a deadline of August 24th to submit feedback on new amateur radio rules being proposed by the Ministry of Communications Department of Telecommunications. The changes relate specifically to the amateur station operator's certificate. A certificate would become mandatory for anyone who wishes to operate or even install ham radio equipment and would be assigned under two categories, restricted and general, defined by operating privileges. The government is also proposing the elimination of a separate authorization for the import of ham radio equipment. Finally, candidates for the certificate will be required to apply to sit for the exam at least 1 month before it is given. The government released a draft of these and related changes, publishing them in the Gazette in July. Feedback and suggestions should be sent directly to the Joint Secretary of the Department of Telecommunications in New Delhi.
Recently, aboard the ISS, Canada's Candarm-2 caught its 50th spacecraft in the form of Northrop Grumman Cygnus cargo vessel since 2009. Although perhaps not the most prominent part of the International Space Station, the Candarm-2 performs a range of wide essential functions on the outside of the ISS, such as moving equipment around and supporting astronauts during EVAs. Officially called the Space Station Remote Manipulator System, it's part of the three-part mobile servicing system that allows for the Candarm-2 and the Dexter unit to scoot around the non-Russian part of the ISS, attached to power data grapple fixtures on the ISS, and manipulate anything that has a compatible grapple fixture on it. Originally, the MSS was not designed to catch spacecraft when it was installed in 2001 by Space Shuttle Endeavour, but with the U.S. moving away from the Space Shuttle to a range of unmanned supply craft which aren't all capable of autonomous docking, this becomes a necessity, with the Japanese HTV with a grapple fixture becoming the first craft to be caught this way in 2009. Since the Candarm-2 was originally designed to manipulate ISS modules, this wasn't a major shift, and the mission was soon planned, also started to build a new space station, and when the first Axiom orbital segment is launched by 2026. This would become the Axiom Station. With Axiom Station planned to have its own Candarm-like system, this will likely mean the Candarm-2 and the rest of the MSS will be decommissioned along with the rest of the ISS by 2031.
While some international broadcasters are switching off their shortwave transmitters, Radio New Zealand Pacific is investing in the medium. On August 1st, the broadcaster put online a brand new 100-kilowatt shortwave transmitter. The new transmitter replaces a 33-year-old Radio New Zealand Pacific transmitter installed in 1989 near Taupo in central North Island. Part of a $4.4 million project to improve Radio New Zealand Pacific's capabilities, the new transmitter supports both DRM digital and analog operation. The switch-on was observed by New Zealand's Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters and dignitaries from Kiribati, the Cook Islands, Samoa, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and Solomon Islands from RNZ House in Wellington, while another RNZ delegation was at the Rangitaki transmitter site. Shortwave was very important back when the New Zealand Broadcasting Service launched in 1948, but it's still seriously important now, said the minister. He went on to say shortwave is the most certain system there is to make sure that in a crisis, tsunami, or cyclone, we can get through. There are 22 broadcast partners throughout the region using RNZ's DRM digital streams by rebroadcasting them locally without compromising audio quality. Following Australia's shutdown of its shortwave transmitters in 2017, New Zealand and China have become the only two providing the region with shortwave services.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
The FCC has granted SpaceX permission to start upgrading its first-generation Starlink constellation with second-generation satellites. The approval promises to help SpaceX improve broadband quality for Starlink, which uses orbiting satellites to beam internet to subscribers on the ground. SpaceX looks forward to deploying upgraded satellite equipment into its first-generation constellation to bring even more robust new-generation satellite service to millions of consumers across the country, particularly in polar regions, the company told the FCC in a letter in April. SpaceX began launching first-generation Starlink satellites in 2019 after securing an FCC license for up to 4,408 satellites. In February 2023, the company then applied to modify the constellation with a request to upgrade its technology using satellite hardware from SpaceX's second-generation Starlink constellation, which has a license to launch up to 7,500 satellites. One key change is how the second-generation satellite tech features advanced beam forming and digital processing technologies and enables narrower beam capabilities to provide more targeted and robust coverage, SpaceX told the FCC at the time. But the company's request received pushback from satellite provider Dish Network over concerns that radio emissions from the satellites risked causing interference to their television service. In its authorization, the FCC said, "We disagree with Dish that SpaceX's use of smaller beams will result in SpaceX violating Commission and International Telecommunications Union equivalent power flux density limits." Meanwhile, the FCC authorized Globalstar to deploy the upgrade of its low Earth orbit constellation, dismissing a SpaceX petition that Globalstar's request be denied. The FCC granted Globalstar's request to begin deploying its replacement constellation, authorizing the operator to deploy up to 17 replacement satellites with a 15-year license term. However, the FCC deferred approval for remaining 9 satellites until Globalstar submits an updated orbital debris mitigation plan. Globalstar's constellation provides mobile satellite services, including service to some models of Apple iPhones.
The Hurricane WatchNet has secured operations for Hurricane Ernesto. In an after-action report, the HWN spokesman said, "We were in continuous operation for 22 hours. From the reports the prominent net received, more than 26,000 residents on Bermuda were without power. Many areas were without internet service as well. The eye wall is now north of the island, and reported wind speeds on the island were near 50 miles per hour. Conditions should continue to improve as the day goes on." The 2024 Atlantic Basin hurricane season is only now beginning to enter its peak season. The second half of August and the month of September have a reputation for being busy and very dangerous. Please do not drop your guard. You still have time to prepare for hurricane season. Never wait until the last minute to do so. The spokesman said, "As always, we greatly appreciate the daily users and various nets who use 14.325 MHz and 7.268 MHz for allowing us a clear frequency. It certainly makes our job easier, and I know those in the affected area appreciate it as well."
The ARRL Foundation Club Grant Program has received 110 applications this year, with projects ranging from simple to complex. The Grant Review Committee will now be evaluating each application and making the difficult decision of which ones to fund. Decisions will be announced later this year, and grants will be awarded before the end of the year. Thanks to funding from Amateur Radio Digital Communications, or ARDC, the Club Grant Program will award $500,000 to Club for projects in their community. Emphasis is given to programs with transformational capabilities. This round of grants will bring the total grant amount awarded to clubs through this program to $1 million. More information about the Club Grant Program and the ARRL Foundation can be found at the ARRL Foundation webpage.
The ARRL has expanded member access to its rich archive of publications. This gives members access to back issues of League publications. With more on this exciting news, we go to John Ross, KD8 IDJ, with more.
The ARRL Periodicals Archive and Search now includes content from two more popular ARRL magazines, QEX, a forum for communications experimenters, which features technical articles and columns of interest to radio amateurs and communications professionals, and NCJ, the National Contest Journal, which covers information, scores, and advice from the world of competitive radio sport and the contributions of top contesters. Before accessing the archive, members should ensure they are first logged into the ARRL website. Members may now view and download articles from across the extensively indexed archive of QEX from 1981 to 2011 and NCJ from 1973 to 2011. Members can access and index and view copies of articles from the huge ARRL Periodicals archive. The archive was first introduced to members in 2008, providing PDF copies of articles from the QST magazine archive. Since then, thousands of members have enjoyed searching, viewing, and printing their favorite articles, projects, and more. The archive is populated with QST articles from 1915 to 2011. While the archive includes access to downloading many older articles, the more recent and current issues of ARRL magazines continue to be available to members in a digital edition. Make sure you see www.arrl.org/magazines for more information. ARRL members now have access to 4 digital edition magazines: QST, On the Air, QEX, and NCJ. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
While this archive includes access to downloading many older articles, the more recent and current issues of ARRL magazines continue to be available to members in a digital edition. You can see www.arrl.org/magazines for more information. Access to the archive is an ARRL membership benefit and a service of the ARRL Technical Information Service.
Boeing's troubled Starliner CST-100 will not be returning home from the International Space Station with astronaut Sunita Williams, KD-5BLP, and Butch Wilmore on board. NASA instead hopes to book a return flight to Earth for them on the next Crew Dragon in February 2025. According to a NASA press release, the space agency will delay the August 18th launch of SpaceX's Crew 9 mission until September 24th and make room for the duo on its return flight in 2025. That would mean sending 2 astronauts to the ISS in September instead of 4. The 2 U.S. astronauts have been in space since the June 5th launch of the Starliner, which has suffered a series of technical issues, including 5 helium leaks. Their mission was to have lasted 8 days. A number of media outlets have reported internal strife at NASA, as officials cannot reach an agreement in the meantime on how to handle the stranded, disabled Boeing spacecraft and whether it can ultimately return to spaceflight.
48 years ago, the Pennsylvania-based Mount Airy VHF Radio Club Pack Rats were experimenting with the latest amateur radio technology, Earth, Moon, Earth, or EME, which became simply known as Moon Bounce. John Ross, KD8IDJ, reports from League headquarters, where the history behind this story.
While the radio equipment was pretty standard for the day, EME was not an easy technology. Moon-bounce contacts required big antennas and kilowatt transmitters. There were a number of dedicated amateur radio operators in a dozen or so countries that had assembled stations capable of making the ultimate long-distance QSO, with one goal in mind: to be the first to work all 6 populated continents on the globe. The Worked All Continents WAC Award, said Club President Phil McGinnis, WA3NUF. The Pack Rats were very early experimenters of EME communications, thanks to a donation of a 20-foot stressed dish antenna by Al Katz, N2UYH, who is now a silent key, and an EME station was assembled at a rural sheep barn in Revere, Pennsylvania. That station, W3CCX/3, began making EME contacts, but the major obstacle to obtaining the WAC award was the lack of an EME station on 432 megahertz on the South American continent. Through a long series of coincidences, hard work by the Pack Rats to help assemble and transport to South America 20 boxes and crates, with the longest box being 6 feet or less, and a seaside college in Barranquilla, Colombia, 6 months of very intense effort ultimately paid off. In early July of 1976, 6 Pack Rats headed to Barranquilla with the call sign HK1TL. In 1 week of operating, the expedition made 16 contacts, but since they were the only station in South America, it was 1 short of the 6 continents needed for the WAC award in Colombia. Meanwhile, in Revere, Pennsylvania, the W3CCX-3 station, manned by Dave Mascaro, WA3JUF, completed a contact with HK1TL on July 29, 1976, achieving the goal of connecting the final continent needed to give the Mount Airy VHF Radio Club WAC on the 70-centimeter band. But the story doesn't end there. The application for the WAC award was mailed and received. There was an issue with the application, but no one remembered the details or recalled what actions were taken at the time, but the club never received a certificate. With the help of retired ARRL Chief Executive Officer Dave Summer, K1ZZ, ARRL Radio Sport and Field Services Manager Bart Janke, W9JJ, and current Chief Executive Officer David Minster, NA2AA, the ARRL went above and beyond to rectify the Mount Airy VHF Radio Club Lost EME WAC Award application, said McGillis. The award now was dated June 6, 1977. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Thanks to Phil Migueles, WA3NUF, and Walt Bowman, K3BPP, for their contributions to the story. For more information, you can find it at PackRat's website, https://packratvhf.com.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The next World Radio Sport Team Championship won't be happening until 2026, but the worldwide competition has already begun for radio amateurs looking to enter this high-level event as part of the sponsored team. Instead of being selected based on the WRTC qualification program, based on results in major contests, prospective sponsored teams engage in competitive bidding in the hopes of securing a place as top bidder. Bidding begins at $20,000 and the sealed bid auction will have 2 rounds. Sponsored teams are considered an important funding source by the World Radio Team Championship organizers. Initial bids may be emailed until April 30th, 2025 to finance@WRTC2026.org. The competitive element continues when 2 winning teams get to the event venue in the east of England. Organizers say that the sponsored teams are as eligible as any other entrants to win the WRTC 2026.
NASA announced a new round of opportunities for CubeSat developers to build spacecraft that will fly on upcoming launches through the agency's CSLI, or CubeSat Launch Initiative. CubeSats are a class of small spacecraft called nanosatellites. The initiative provides space access to U.S. educational institutions, certain nonprofit organizations, and informal educational institutions such as museums and science centers, as well as NASA centers focused on workforce development, including the agency's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern California. It also encourages participation by minority-serving institutions. Working with CubeSats is a way to get students interested in launching a career in the space program, said Jeannie Hall, CSLI program executive. NASA reviews applications for CubeSat missions every year, selects projects with an educational component that can benefit the agency in better understanding. Applications and applicants must be submitted by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, November 11. NASA experts will make selections by March 14th for flight opportunities in 2026 through 2029. Although selection doesn't guarantee a launch opportunity, applicants are responsible for funding the development of these small satellites. Selected CubeSats get assigned a launch and deployment directly from a rocket or to low Earth orbit from International Space Station. Once accepted, NASA mission managers act as advisors to the CubeSat team, ensuring technical, safety, and regulatory requirements are satisfied before the launch. Those selected will strengthen their skills in hardware design and development and build knowledge in operating the CubeSat. 8 CubeSat missions are recently shared a ride onto space with Firefly's Aerospace Alpha rocket that launched on July 3rd from Vandenberg. One mission is CatSat, built by students at the University of Arizona, which is treating a deployable antenna attached to a Mylar balloon. Another CubeSat-1 was built by the University of Kansas, testing a new method of measuring cosmic rays that hit the Earth. This launch is also notable for two CSLI first milestones. The CubeSat-1 and another called MESAT-1 were the first CSLI missions from the states of Kansas and Maine. 4 CubeSats also went into the space station as cargo in a SpaceX Dragon capsule on March 21 aboard a Falcon 9 rocket. The space station in Florida as part of the agency's SpaceX 30th commercial resupply mission. Once aboard the space station, astronauts deployed the small missions into various orbits to demonstrate and mature technologies meant to improve the solar power generation, detect gamma-ray bursts, and determine crop water usage, also measuring root zone soil and snowpack moisture levels. CubeSats are a class of spacecraft aimed in the multiples of a standardized unit called a 1 unit, or 1U CubeSat. It's about 10 by 10 by 11 centimeters in size, or 3.9 by 3.9 by 4.5 inches. They're small enough to fit in the palm of your hand and can be stacked together to form a slightly larger, more capable spacecraft. A 3U CubeSat is 3 times the size of a 1U, a 6U 6 times. NASA has selected CubeSat missions from 45 states, Washington, and Puerto Rico, and launched about 160 CubeSats since its inception. The CubeSat launch initiative is managed by NASA's Launch Services Program, based at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. To learn more information about CSLI, visit go.nasa.gov.
Alabama Broadcasters Association has named Carl Sampieri as its 2024 Engineer of the Year. He started as an amateur radio enthusiast as a teen and still carries the call sign N4NRE. He built most of the radio stations in the Tennessee Valley. Sampieri earned his first-class radio telephone license at age 18, then joined the Air Force as an airborne radio repairman and got a commendation for working with Armed Forces Radio Thailand. Sampieri's first broadcasting jobs were in 1967. After leaving the Air Force, he moved back to Huntsville to work for WAAY-TV as an engineer. Sampieri recently retired as the engineer at Huntsville iHeartRadio Cluster after 26 years and has worked for nearly 20 years as chief engineer at WLRH Public Radio. Here's a fun fact. It is said Huey Lewis's Heart of Rock and Roll was the first song played across every new transmitter Sampieri has turned on. His future plans include finishing renovations to his 100-year-old house in Madison, which features 2 60-foot ham radio towers in his backyard.
An amateur radio club has helped fill a gap in an emergency communications network in British Columbia with a much-needed repeater. A missing piece of emergency communication for the valley and backcountry surrounding Canada's Wells Grey Provincial Park has finally been put into place. A new repeater station is up and running after hours of work by members of the Wells Grey Amateur Radio Club in Clearwater. It has become a vital part of a network that already serves such communities as Upper Clearwater, Mahood Lake, and Clearwater Lake in the event of rescues, missing person reports, or natural disasters. The park itself is in a wild natural area in the Thompson-Nicola region of interior British Columbia. The hams provide communication support to first responders such as those in Upper Clearwater Volunteer Fire Brigade. The communications network also serves the Blackpool Fire Rescue and other fire departments around the valley. The club treasurer, Cliff Olson, VE7EIN, told the Clearwater Times website that having a more robust system allows for a better network planning.
The FCC has approved the launch of a low Earth orbit communications array of 5 satellites on V-band that is expected to open the door for U.S. smartphones to make use of space-based cellular broadband services across the nation. The satellites have been given the okay to operate in the 37.5 to 42 gigahertz range for space-to-Earth communications and the ranges of 47.2 to 50.2 gigahertz and 50.4 to 51.4 gigahertz for Earth-to-space communications. Approval was also given for the use of 430 to 440 megahertz for space-to-Earth and Earth-to-space transmissions, 2025 to 2110 MHz for Earth-to-space transmissions, and 2200 through 2290 MHz for space-to-Earth transmissions. The approvals are granted to Texas-based ASD Space Mobile for what the company is characterizing as the largest communications array in history in low Earth orbit.
Adventure radio enthusiasts have been waiting for the 31st of August and the 1st of September, the weekend that marks the official launch of the HEMA Awards program in New Zealand. Hams there are making a special effort on this debut weekend to fill their logs and are hoping for some trans-Tasman H-to-H contacts with Australian radio amateurs. Operators around the world wanting to earn HEMA awards should go to the HEMA website at hema.org.uk. The website contains a full explanation of HEMA and how it works. New Zealand hams will be able also to upload their logs to ontheair.nz. That's ontheair, one word, .nz, so they can compare their progress towards awards against other ZL hams.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Friendships are high on the list of things many of us value in amateur radio, and a recent get-together in Europe for one group of YLs marked a chance to renew that sisterhood and to get on the air. 5 summers after they first successfully celebrated their friendship and share of love of amateur radio, an international group of 22 YLs returned to the contest station in Moravia in the Czech Republic, where it all had began. Eva, HB9 FPM, believed it was time for an even bigger event at the top class contest station, OK5Z, where YLs from 11 nations gathered between August 4th and 10th. Under the call sign OL88YL, they chased DX from the massive antenna farm, taking time off to learn to build dipoles of their own under the guidance of Marcus, HB9HVG, and Andreas, HB9JOE. The 20 and 15 meter antennas were then tested the next 2 days at the 3 SOTA summits that were also part of the Worldwide Fauna and Flora Award Scheme. There were moments of celebration too, when Hans, PB2T, of the Yasmi Foundation, presented their Yasmi Excellence Award to Raisa, R1BIG, for her promotion of amateur radio on her YouTube channel. When not on the air, the YLs toured places rich with the region's cultural history. For those traveling from Poland, Japan, Luxembourg, Turkey, the UK, the Russian Federation, and elsewhere, the long 5-year wait to be together again ended happily.
And finally this week, we leave you with this story. The moon is a constant in the night sky, but all is not actually as it seems. It turns out that scientists have discovered the moon is drifting away from Earth, and it's changing everything we thought we knew about our planet's relationship with its only natural satellite. It is also having a very real impact on the length of days on our planet, albeit at an incredibly slow rate. By moving away from Earth over the course of millions of years, the moon is simultaneously making the length of the average day longer. A study by a team at the University of Wisconsin at Madison focused on rock from a formation aged at 90 million years. By doing so, they were able to analyze the Earth's interaction with the moon 1.4 billion years ago. It turns out that the moon is moving away from Earth at 3.82 centimeters a year. That means that eventually it will result in Earth days lasting 25 hours. But that's approximately in 200 million years' time.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeater systems all around the U.S. and around the world on great operations like WA0RCR from the center of the U.S., Wentzville, Missouri, where This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to be part of the legendary Gateway 160-meter net report each weekend. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.